Sometimes we feel like we tell the story of hurt and loss in our lives over and over again, and we wonder whether it will ever get better, whether we'll ever have a new story to tell. If you're anything like me, maybe you even feel embarrassed to keep returning to the same problems, the same losses. Today, I'm talking with psychiatrist Curt Thompson about how suffering can move us towards hope. And one of the most significant things that I took away from this conversation was the importance of repeating our stories in the presence of compassionate listeners who are willing to sit with us and hear it again and again until the healing is complete. I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear. I'm so glad you're here today for a conversation about suffering and hope and healing and how we show up for each other in the midst of pain and how God shows up for us. I am here today with Dr. Curt Thompson, and Dr. Thompson, just want to say welcome to Love is Stronger Than Fear. We're really, really excited to have you here.
Amy Julia, it is a pleasure to be with you. I've been looking forward to this for some time, ever since I heard that we were going to be doing this together, and so it's an honor. I'm really thrilled to be with you. So thanks for having me on.
Well, you're very welcome. And I'm going to tell listeners what you and I have already talked about before we hit record, which is that I think our point of connection is Hope Heals Camp. And I don't know that anyone will see the video of this, but I'm wearing my Hope Heals sweatshirt just to honor that reality. And I thought, this book that we're here to really talk about today, The Deepest Place, is about hope and it's about suffering.
Mm,
And so I really felt like that point of connection for us, even though we
mm,
haven't been at Hope Heals at the same time,
mm,
we've both been in this camp experience, which
mm,
some listeners will be familiar with, but others will
mm,
not, in which there are all sorts of people who are
mm, mm,
experiencing pretty profound
mm,
suffering,
mm, mm,
and who are being,
mm,
I guess, exhorted
mhm,
to hold on to hope
mhm,
without being exhorted to deny or
mhm,
dismiss their suffering.
mhm,
And so I just thought maybe we could start there because,
mm,
again, that's a place where we have, been connected at least through other people.
mhm.
Is just like, could you talk about your own? I mean, give us a little bit of your background, but also like, how did you get to Hope Heals Camp, and
Yeah.
how does that experience, like, does that link to, in your own mind, like the work that you've done
Mm,
in this book, The Deepest Place? I'd just love
mm.
to hear about that.
Yeah, well, my background is I was born and raised in Ohio. I was the youngest of four sons. My parents were in their 40s when my brothers were 18, 16, and 11 when I was born.
Mm.
My father died when I was 17. I have lost all three of those brothers to cancer.
Wow.
I have been married for 37 years as of 2 days ago. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. We have a daughter who's 33 and a son who is 30. All those things that I've just named have been extraordinarily formative for me. I grew up in what we would call an evangelical Quaker tradition of spiritual
Hmm.
formation. Yeah, that look on your face is the same look that I get in me, like, huh, how do we, what, wait, how do you connect those dots, please? Um, so that's a story in and of itself, but was I would say is a significant part of all that is good and rich about my life, is because
Yeah.
of that community. And then I went to a small Christian liberal arts school, off to medical school, and then residency training. That again is also another story about how psychiatry. I tell people that I think Jesus has found me in a number of different ways over the years. One of the ways that he found me was through psychiatry. The psychiatry found me and not the other way around. And so
Hmm.
I am grateful. I can't believe that I get paid to do what I do, and I don't deserve my life. And this book emerged. I've written three other previous works that have one having to do with neuroscience and spiritual formation, one having to do with shame, which is, in my sense, the primary affective state that is leads to our undoing. The third work was on how longing and beauty, in the context of vulnerable community, really are a response to the violence of shame that is, not just in small ways, but in large ways, kind of devouring us and has been devouring us.
Mm.
We Christians would say from the beginning, or
Yeah.
attempting to devour us. Because all this notion of longing and beauty and presence to respond to violence shows up in the person of life, death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus. And that then brings us to this last work, this most recent work on shame. And I'll just say a word about Hope Heals Camp to this regard, because anybody, if you have a pulse, you suffer.
Hmm.
Um, for those of us in the West, and for most of us in the West, if our listeners are here like, I don't really suffer, I can't really say, then I would say it is probably the case that you have enough accessories in your life to protect you from yourself, such that that's the only reason you think you don't. There will always be there's some part of us that suffers. And we
Hmm.
do all kinds of things to avoid it. And we've been doing this from the very beginning of time. This is not a new thing for us. One of the things that the pandemic did was it pulled the curtain back on our ultimate inability to avoid it. Right? It just kind of pulled the curtain back, and there we are. And we're exposed to ourselves. Is what we weren't just exposed to a virus. We were exposed to ourselves. And one of the things that Hope Heals Camp does, when you said at that camp we are exhorted to
Hmm.
hope in the middle of hard things. One of the beautiful things about it is that when we think about that, we think, oh, I'm to be exhorted is I'm told something, right? I hear words that
Hmm.
say, Curt, you should be hopeful, and I'm like, great, that and a cup of coffee does what for me?
Yeah.
But the thing that happens at this camp is that people have embodied encounters with other people who care for them in ways that
Yeah.
they've never been cared for, who attune to them in ways that have never been attuned to, who
Yep.
celebrate with them, all the while acknowledging the reality of their pain. We're not pretending that this is not here. I mean, this is the news of the gospel, right? With crucifixion, God is saying, I'm not going to pretend that the world is a pain-free place. In fact, I'm going to wade right into it and put it on myself, and I'm going to carry it. I'm going to be with you in this space. And one of the things that we talk about, I try to recognize, and like the whole notion of hope in and of itself, um, we often don't think about it until we're in trouble.
Hmm.
And then I think, oh, I need some hope because I'm in trouble. When the reality is, Amy Julia, is that we actually employ hope all day, every day. We just don't know
Hmm.
that we're doing it. I hope that my car starts. Now, I don't think that I'm hoping my car starts, but I go with the anticipation that it will. And what I'm really doing is hoping that my car starts. And lo and behold, it does,
Yeah.
most times. But you see what I mean? Like we're doing it all the time. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of, well, when we find ourselves unable to escape our pain, which is when then the question becomes, how do we form durable hope? And that's really the question. How do we form durable hope? And I would suggest that it is in the face of suffering that durable hope is most durably formed. And we do
Well, and
it.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and
It is
that's what
not
I
a
wanted
thing.
to ask about.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, it was just
Sorry.
that connection between suffering and hope, because that's
Yeah.
really what this book is all about. And I'll quote you to you, and then ask you to just talk about it a little bit. This is something you wrote. We will become increasingly hopeful, not as a function of simply attempting to be hopeful.
Hmm.
Rather, it will develop indirectly
Hmm.
as a byproduct of the persevering work we do in response to suffering. So
Hmm.
there is a sense of like suffering catalyzing hope
That's right.
in that definition, right? And so could you just, and I know this is the whole book, so we're getting a little bit of a synopsis of it, but how is it that hope can be, because it's not the only byproduct of suffering, it's not the inevitable one, but it is a
Right.
possible one. And
Right.
how is that even possible?
Yeah. Well, I think as one of the reasons why we explore the particular text from St. Paul's letter to the church at Rome, the reason we explore this text is because there is an on ramp to hope. There's an on ramp to suffering, actually, even. And so there are
Mhm.
some, we have to actually examine what my assumptions are that I'm living with. We're all living with a bunch of assumptions about the way the world is and the way the world should be.
Yeah.
And some of those assumptions that are significant include that I should be able to be master of my universe. I should be able to take care of my own problems. I should be able to, and all the things about the individualistic silos that we have been
Yeah.
formed to believe that we are. When in fact, that's not what neuroscience would tell us. That's not what the material world would tell us. And so we're actually living lives that fight against the way we're actually like made to live. So we've got our own set of anxieties already ready to go with this. And so we don't recognize that in order for me to be hopeful, I form it most deeply in the context of a deeply connected, vulnerable community. That's how
Mm.
newborns and infants and toddlers form it. They don't know that that's what they're doing, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're forming hope.
Yeah.
And they form most durable hope in the middle of the hardest places in their lives, even as little ones. That's what they're doing. And then when we get to places, whether it's either chronic medical and physical infirmities, or whether it's emotional infirmities, whatever the pain is to which we're responding over time, which is what we call suffering. The real question is, with whom will I dwell as I encounter this pain, such that I have the opportunity to practice over and over and over again, sensing others' presence with me, being present with me with loving kindness in the middle of my pain, such
Yeah.
that my experience of my pain is being transformed because of the attunement that I'm allowing myself to be receptive to from others who are here in this space to love me. And, hope, as we say, is a function. The mind, we like to say that we anticipate our future based on what we remember. I remember my future, right? I don't ever anticipate a future that is not based on some kind of past experience I've had, good, bad, or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Hope being a future state, I'm hopeful for something either 5 minutes from now or years from now or whatever, is always going to be based on what I am encoding that I'm experiencing in the present moment. And so if I'm in a present moment in which I am in distress, in pain, and you're being present for me and with me, even if you can't solve my problem, your presence becomes something that literally begins to, in the best possible way, entangle itself with my pain, such that my pain, the quality of and the nature of how I experience my pain is transformed because of your
Mm-hmm.
presence. And if I practice this over and over and over again, what I begin to do is to anticipate a future in which when my pain comes, so will Amy Julia. When my pain comes, so will my community. So will the people who love me. When my pain comes, I will begin to anticipate that I am to be loved, not that I will be left alone in isolation with my distress.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, that's I was so I want to get to community because that's
Hmm.
so crucial. Not just to the book and well, I'll say more about community in a minute, but before we get there, back to your point about the individualistic silos, right? We
Yeah.
don't live in a culture that put there are two things I think that push us away from what you are talking about in this book. And the first is being surprised by suffering, that sense
Hmm.
of life shouldn't be this way, which
Hmm.
does seem new, right,
Hmm.
in human
Hmm.
history. Like
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
idea that we are not supposed to, and I don't mean that people 200 years ago were like, I'm supposed to suffer because I'm bad. It was just an inevitable aspect of life. And so what I'm
Hmm.
supposed to do is learn how to do that and learn
Hmm.
how to do
Hmm.
that well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there's that individualistic sense of, or that I guess there's an individualistic sense of I'm supposed to figure this out by myself.
Hmm.
And second of all, I'm supposed to figure it out and it's not supposed to be happening. So
Right.
I'm curious if you could talk about like the things that we do under that illusion that we're
Hmm.
not supposed to be suffering.
Right.
Because I think we need to admit the suffering before we can even get to the hope. And so if
Right.
we're denying suffering, if we're feeling shame because of suffering, if
Hmm.
like we get, so I'm wondering if you can just talk about that and then we can talk about if we are able to acknowledge that suffering, what can happen that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things. I don't think there's much or anything in the culture. I mean, because evil is very smart Evil
Mm.
doesn't come to your door at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and say, Amy Julia, let's go rob a bank.
Right.
Doesn't do that. It's very subtle. And so we don't have the culture saying with a bullhorn, nobody should have to suffer. It's not doing that. It does other things. It's like AT&T. It says you be you, right? You be you, which means you can be anything that you want to be, and nothing should get in your way. And if something gets in your way, then there's something wrong with the way. If you're in distress because something's like there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Or we have the little supercomputers that we walk around with in our pockets that make it accessible for us to distract ourselves anytime the least bit of distress emerges. I'll just keep scrolling. Now, this is great for Facebook and for Instagram and for Google and Meta. And so this is not great for the human soul. This is not great for human beings.
Yeah.
And so we're doing things all the time that are subtly and implicitly training us to believe that we should not have to suffer.
Mm.
Right. And there has been a somewhat exponential advance, especially with the development of the internet, in which this has just become the case. But we've been 500 years of this in the making.
Right.
Modernity and progress and so forth and so on. When we think about progress, we think about the elimination of pain. So we in the West, we have a metaphysic in which we want to eliminate it. In the East, we want to like act as if it doesn't exist. We're going to it's here, but we're going to do whatever we need to do to like live in the world that's not material and so forth and so on.
Right.
And this is where I say that the Christian story is the only story on the planet that actually honors shame. I'm sorry, honors suffering. It's the only story that honors suffering,
Mm.
that
Mm.
says about suffering that suffering is the expected response, not just of human beings, but of the entire world to what we humans have done to the world and to ourselves. And but we're not shaming ourselves because we suffer. And so you're right, we have all these ways in which we are subtly being trained to avoid it, to pretend it doesn't exist, so that when it does show up, we think there's something wrong with us. We think that there's a problem in the world. And so naming our suffering is one of the most important, crucial elements of it in order for
Hmm.
us to be able to take action in response to it.
Yeah, I'm reminded, and I'm sure you've written about this somewhere, but of that, there's a verse in the Bible where it talks about Jesus enduring the cross and scorning its shame.
Hmm.
So even though he
Hmm.
endured the suffering of it,
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
did not actually um, receive the shame of it in the,
Hmm.
and I think
Right.
that to me was really important in terms of divorcing suffering from shame
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
recognizing that they don't have to be the same.
That's right.
And I think that it's interesting. I mean, my experience of suffering has all been, well, not all, but my most profound experiences of suffering have been in relation to people I love who are suffering. So whether
Hmm.
that is, my best friend's younger brother died in a car accident. My husband's mom died of liver cancer, and we were her primary caregivers. So we were right there in the thick of it.
Hmm.
And then when our daughter was born with Down syndrome, that felt like suffering for a while. It did not
Hmm.
continue to
Hmm.
feel like suffering. And I'm really grateful for that. But through her, we have been certainly in relationship with a lot of families who do have diagnoses where suffering is a part of it. But for me, that experience, especially when Penny was first born, I do think some of my perceived suffering, which it wasn't really actually, we had a healthy baby who, has lived a really good life, but had to do with shame and had to
Hmm.
do with actually thinking that we were going to be in some way outcast because of
Hmm.
having a child with an intellectual disability.
Hmm.
And naming the truth of the situation in our case, which was in our case, there was not suffering or shame that needed to be what we were living into. In
Hmm.
other cases, I think it's more that separation of this does not need to be shameful. It's just
Hmm.
about suffering.
Hmm.
But I think that's really, it's helpful to talk about what does it mean to like name suffering and the power that comes in that in
Hmm.
being honest.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I guess the other thing, and listeners to this podcast will have heard me say this before, but my most recent book is about healing,
Hmm.
and in it, I came to a place of thinking, honesty, humility, and hope are
Mhm.
the movements of healing. That
Mhm.
when we can't heal if we're not honest about our pain, about our
Mhm.
woundedness,
Mhm.
and if we're
Mhm.
not humble in the sense of asking for help. Like if we
Mhm.
try to do
Mhm.
it alone, even
Mhm.
if we know we're there, but we're trying to deal with it without telling anyone or talking about it,
Mhm.
and if we don't have any hope that there actually is healing that's
Mhm.
possible, then we
Mhm.
tend to get stuck.
Mhm.
Um, so I wonder if we could maybe move from that honesty piece to the humility piece, is what I call it, but which
Mhm.
is that community aspect. Because
Yeah.
what I love about your book is that you're really not saying, pray and you
Mm.
are going to be able to move from suffering to hope. And
Right.
not to say prayer couldn't be a part of that, but there's
Right.
so much emphasis on like other people in the flesh. Could you
Mhm.
just like speak to
Yeah.
why that is so crucially important?
Yeah. Well, as our friends at the Bible Project like to say, everything you need to know about human beings you could learn by reading the first 6 chapters of Genesis. You don't really need to
So
live.
true.
You don't have to read anything past that. Like everything you need to know, it's right there. And one of the
Yep.
first things that we see on the second page of the Bible, which is what, as I hear you, which is really what you're really coming back to. This is a recapitulation. Like God doesn't appear to be changing his methodology or his intention for the creation just because we're pretty broken. He's still going back to his those first 2 pages of the Bible and say, like, folks, this is how we're going to do it. And so, even when we're broken, and it comes to then our longing for and need for healing, your notion of humility, as the Jews would say, that to be a person of humility is to know who we are and to know who we are not. And
Mm,
who we are vulnerable creatures. That's who we are. The man and his wife were naked and unashamed, right? They were naked, and in Genesis 2, this notion, the Hebrew would are emphasizing nakedness not just as a physical reality, but as this state of vulnerability. That to be naked means I actually need your help. I
mm,
need you in order for me to be okay. I don't need you. Like I don't. It's not because I'm broken. Do I need your help? Like I've needed your help from the beginning when things were
right.
great. I need your help, and I need your help, and I need your protection, and vice versa.
Yeah.
This is what we need in order for us to flourish. This is required, and of course, part of what shame does is it locks me into this place where I worry about needing you because at some point you're going to say or do something that's going to humiliate me, that's going to bring shame, or you're going to something's going to happen and you're going to leave.
Mhm.
So it's hard to trust. So how am I going to be able to be vulnerable? But this is the point. Our naming things, actually, to name that I need help, is a powerful way of saying, "Oh, I'm actually going to live the way I was made to live from the beginning, in the best possible world." That's now in our world that can feel scary, but once we start to practice that, we begin to recognize, and this is, coming back to Hope Heals Camp, people show up and they're like all these people who are like, oh my gosh, like we're so different. And you're just like me. Like I feel like I'm being seen literally in the flesh
Mm.
for the first time in a way that I'm never seen in the world that I typically occupy in, where I live. And so this is not, so you're right. Hope is not a thing I conjure in my own head. Hope is a thing that I form by literally being in the room with other human beings
Mhm.
by whom I'm being deeply seen, as we say, seen, soothed, safe, secure, in an
Mhm.
embodied way, not in some just abstract way about abstract notion of ideas, but an embodied way in which I feel the comfort of your gaze, of the tone of your voice, of the embrace of an embrace, all the things, even in the face of me just having said to you things about myself that I hate, or even after I just told you my story of what happened to me or what happened to my child. And as we have these experiences of being loved, uh, my experience of my suffering, of my pain, is transformed because I have a story that I have told about my pain. And as we talked about in the book, we suffer for these three reasons: things that happen to us, things that we do to ourselves, and we suffer because we are running to the light. We suffer when we are going to work toward growth and integration and so forth. But it's that second category, the things that we do to ourselves that, by
Mm.
volume is the most common way that we suffer without our knowing it. And so I have these stories that I tell myself I subject myself to. And it's not until someone else walks in the room and starts asking me a set of questions out of curiosity and not with condemnation, not with shame, that I can begin to imagine a different story that I can't tell if you don't help me imagine it ahead of time, because I'm so stuck in my imaginative processes of brokenness. We like to, as we know at the Hope Heals Camp, Jay and Catherine like to talk about, everybody has a disability. Some are more obvious than others.
Yeah.
And, we can say, gosh, it's pretty plain that one of our disabilities is that we're not very good at loving one another. That's pretty plain. But like, just look at our world. But there is a disability that's actually greater than that. And this is what evil counts on. And that is my inability, my disability in being able to be receptive to being loved.
Yeah.
And it is in these embodied spaces that I let myself take the risk of doing that.
My mind is going in multiple directions, and I'm trying to decide which one I'm going to say next. Um, I'm just thinking about our daughter Penny and
Mm,
the ways in which, although she has much more visible disabilities, both in terms of some physical, fine motor skills, and certainly some intellectual disabilities, she is, I think I can say without being sentimental about it, more able to love and be loved
hmm
than most of the other people in my life.
hmm
And I'm
hmm
thinking about this moment I had at Hope Heals Camp where one of the adults who was there pulled me aside and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I feel like I am just like monopolizing Penny's time. I keep seeking her out because I just want to be with her. She makes me feel so loved." And I essentially started crying because I said, "No one has ever said what you have said to me before." She truly was apologizing to me
hmm
for the time she spent with Penny, because she saw
hmm
it as like, I am just like taking the love that this young adult wants to
hmm
give me.
hmm
And I was
hmm
like, please keep going. I mean, this is what she is very
oh,
happy. And
oh,
this is great. But
that's
I
awesome.
just am so struck by um, that sense of when we are in a place where we're able to be vulnerable and where we start to see that naming our suffering, that living in that place, like that, all of those things are actually happening and real,
Mhm,
then we are more able to receive it too. Like there's a
mhm, mhm.
mutuality to the giving and receiving that can begin to happen
Right.
when we put our armor down. And that's, I'd love, will you just describe, because you do this so beautifully in the book. There are a lot of different kind of case studies almost,
Mm,
although that makes it sound more clinical. There's stories you tell of men and women who are parts of confessional communities. Could you
mhm.
describe a confessional community? Because most people are listening to this and they're like, well, I'm never going to Hope Heals Camp. But like what is a confessional community, and how could people even find one or access that?
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is, by all means, if you think you're not going to Hope Heals Camp, you can always volunteer. You can always do that. So that's
True.
one thing to consider. Uh, um, I would say first and foremost that, as we like to say, the brain can do a lot of hard things for a really long time, as long as it doesn't have to do it by itself.
Mm,
We are, we this is common kind of communal lingo now. We were made for connection. We're like, we live. We were made, and yet we actually do live kind of against that grain. We tend to do things that keep us separate from one another. So we really do believe, and this came out of the work in our practice, but it's now being extended in other domains. It's confessional community is number one. It is, by any other name, group psychotherapy. So it works with the dynamics of group psychotherapy dynamics, but it also explicitly sits within an understanding of what it means to be human from a Christian perspective. So it means that we believe that we are created, that we're not making ourselves. It means that we were created to be loved and to love. It means that we were created to create things, create beauty and goodness in the world. It also means that we acknowledge that we are broken. And my tendency is not to love and be loved and to create beauty and goodness in the world without my messing it up. I need help in this regard. And it also accesses the principles of this field that I work in called interpersonal neurobiology. So it's this, how does brain science, brain and relational science, attachment and so forth, how do these things work together to shape one another? What are lots of different ways that we uh, insert and include language and practices that have to do with that way of kind of implementing neuroscience into the present moment that's happening. And one of the things that we say, Amy Julia, in these spaces, when people think about psychotherapy, let alone group psychotherapy, people have ideas about what that means and what happens, in the office behind the door, like all these like strange things, right? And to which I say, look, uh, everything that happens in these confessional communities is actually happening outside these walls,
Hmm.
in your church pews, at Safeway, in your bedroom, in your boardroom, in your kitchen, on the playground. It's all happening everywhere. What separates what we do in this space is that we are explicit about what actually is happening. We're actually naming the things that are taking place in the
Mhm.
room. And we're not just naming them as abstractions. We're naming them in terms of, like, we don't just people don't just come into these groups simply eventually to talk just about the things that are happening outside the room. We're going to talk about them in marriage, or my parents, or my child, or my work, or my this, or my that. All those things are like portals. Those are like doorways
Mm.
into what happens when the community starts to talk with themselves, about what's happening in the room between each other. And of course, uh, this is what's, we are having things that are happening between us and other people all the time that we don't name, because there's way too much fear and shame in the room. It
Mm.
happens between us, at the checkout counter at our hotel when we leave because our room wasn't okay. It happens in all these other places. And I think one of the things that, this book was really kind of emerged as an acknowledgement of all the suffering that people bring into this space. It is a kind of distilled space where suffering comes. But what makes it a space of healing is that people are practicing naming their suffering. And they're naming what, like, how does that show up in real time and space? And how is it showing up right now? How many times in these groups, for instance, will a person say, like, well, no, I don't want to talk about that anymore because you guys have already heard that part of my story, like 10 times. Like, oh, and so it's not okay for us to hear it the 11th. I mean, this is part of how it is that many of us, like, we have all kinds of stories that are about our suffering that we assume nobody wants to hear. Nobody's going to want to hear this because this is too much, this is too big, so forth and so on. And so I simply pile on to my suffering by not naming it. But
Hmm.
it is in these confessional communities where we're not just talking to each other, but we're also inviting into this space what we hear and learn and pray about in the texts that we're hearing from outside. Because my suffering is not a thing, as you rightly said earlier. I can't just hope on my own. I'm going to have to borrow your hope for me
Mm. Yeah.
until mine can catch up. And that's the way that I form it. As we like to say, at the end of the day, I don't form hope for me, we form hope for me.
Mm.
And that's the only way hope is ever formed, because that's how the human brain only ever grows and thrives and flourishes, in a context of this rhythm between I and we, back and forth, as we were made to do from the beginning.
Mm. I love that idea of forming hope for each other. And I think, again, one of the really important pieces of this book for me was that sense of this is not simply about going to therapy
Mm,
or knowing God, both of which are great aspects of a healing process. But without other people who will persevere with you in the midst of suffering, you won't really know actually what it means for God to love you. Because there is just this embodied reality that we are meant to give one another
mhm.
that reflects I that idea of like glorifying God, and you have a chapter on glory as well, but the that when we glorify God when we reflect back to God who God is, right?
Hmm.
That is
Hmm.
actually what we are able to
Hmm.
do in loving each
Hmm.
other, and in loving each
Hmm.
other in that
Hmm.
patient way of sitting
Hmm.
in the suffering together and saying, I'm not going to
Hmm.
leave.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
had a woman write to me this week and say, I have people in my family who have a child with, terminal diagnosis, and what do I do? And I wrote her back and talked about your book, and I said,
Hmm.
you just stay.
Hmm.
And sure, bring the meal. Absolutely. If they need an errand, like that's a part of staying, but like
Hmm. Hmm.
more than anything else, you stay. And she said, you're right. I want to fix it. And
Hmm.
that's not the answer.
Hmm.
The answer
Hmm.
is just to be there and
Hmm.
bear witness with them, to the pain of
Hmm.
this. And I think that's this other important thing, especially in Christian circles, although there's probably a kind of secular version of it too, with the idea of toxic positivity, that like
Hmm.
hope is not toxic positivity in which we
Hmm.
just say everything's going to work out fine or everything
Right.
happens for a reason. Like there's a
Right.
depth to it that actually can still hold the reality of pain and loss,
Yeah. Right.
and yet still hold on to hope.
Right.
And I do think that somehow the being with one another is a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true that it's like a lot of things, Amy Julia, as humans that happen to us. In that I don't become a really good piano player by becoming a good piano player. I become a good piano player. Becoming a good piano player is a byproduct of hours and hours and hours and hours of practice.
Right.
I don't form hope because I set out to form hope. I form hope as a byproduct of persevering, practicing allowing myself to be loved in the middle of my suffering. And that perseverance, which leads to character, which is a word that's also crucially important, character implying the durable qualities and characteristics of how I am in the world, how I comport myself in the world. Am I a person of patience? Am I a person of kindness? Or am I a person of irritability? Am I a person who's short tempered? Those are things that are durable. And as we say, hope becomes this extended way that I imagine the future based on the things that I'm practicing right here and now over and over and over and over again. And the beautiful thing is that because I imagine a future that is hopeful, that imagined future circles back around into my present moment and continues to support my willingness to continue to be present then for others. I think this is also part of it. It's one of the things that's also true about these confessional communities that is different. If you're going to see a counselor, for example, for our audience, many of our in our audience might have gone to see a counselor who sees them for their individual
Yep.
particular issues that they're going to see them for, and that's helpful, and it's a lovely thing that we have this in our day and age, this opportunity for healing to do this. But there is something that does not happen in an individual counseling setting that does happen in a confessional community setting, and that is that if you're my therapist, and I'm telling you my story, and it's being extraordinarily helpful for me as you help me do this. You would find along the way that the work that we do together is also going to speak to your own story. It's going to speak to things in your own life, and it's going to be helpful for you. As we like to say, any therapist worth their salt will say, um, "My greatest teachers are my patients,"
Right.
and this is how I imagine things about my own story come up, and I work on this. But what you're probably not going to do very often is that you're not going to tell me every now and then, well, Curt, I just want to share some things from my own story about how
Right.
your story is transforming me. But in a confessional community, one of the things that every member gets to experience is how their being vulnerable actually becomes transformational for other people in the room. And a significant part of our healing that we often way underestimate, which doesn't really we don't really we're not really able to access in individual psychotherapy settings, is the way I give myself away to others in vulnerability. Not I'll tell patients who I'm wanting to join these. I say, look, I don't just think that this group is going to be helpful for you. I think you're going to be helpful for the group, but not because of your wit and your wisdom, not because of the way that you solve people's problems. You're going to be helpful counterintuitively by virtue of being vulnerable with the parts of you that you hate the most. And
Right.
of course, people find this really quite distressing at first, and they're not really sure this is a very good idea. Uh, and it is consistently striking to watch the way people experience healing when they hear the way that their own suffering and their own sorrow and their own vulnerability and their brokenness and their revealing of that creates opportunity for others to come into the room and say, oh my gosh, I don't think I ever would have been able to name what I'm about to name if you hadn't said what you just said. Thank you so. And you're like, I, I, and we would say like this is Good Friday writ large, right? Because this is we are healed by His stripes. We are healed. We are healed counterintuitively, not because God comes and magically changes all of our stuff. It's because
Yeah.
God comes and suffers with us and dies with us. And we point to that and say, that's me. But we also point to that and say, I'm Him. And I'm not alone with this. And with resurrection, we then say, oh, and he didn't just come to be with me. He came to be with me fully so that I can fully go with Him where He wants to take me. Yeah. But I can't, I'll be hard pressed to for all of me to go if there are still parts that are suffering that I don't want to name.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of one of the huge barriers being our inability to be loved again in the broken place. It's
Mhm.
kind of one thing. I loved your saying, why wouldn't we listen 11 times? If you need to say it 11 times, we'll listen 11 times. Like that's why we're here. But that is where, again, like that word shame comes up. The thought of like,
Right.
this is another thing I've thought about with healing, because so often I feel like whether it's me personally, but also especially in relationships where I'm like, how are my husband and I back in the same place? Like, how are we having the same argument? We are
Mhm.
not getting anywhere. I can't believe this. And I find, um,
Have you been in my kitchen?
well, you did say 37 years, so I can only
Yes.
imagine.
Yes.
But what I've started to believe is that we are spiraling upwards. And so,
Yep.
yes,
Yeah.
we're going back to
Yeah.
the same territory, but it's actually
Yeah.
not exactly the same. It's
That's
not a
right.
straight line. There's nothing linear about it.
That's
And
right.
yet, even the fact that I'm noticing we're here again,
Hmm.
what happened last time? Is there anything that we can do to repair more quickly or to acknowledge hurt or whatever it is? And that has really helped me in my own coming back to the same thing. And I can imagine the 11th time telling the story is not the same as the 10th or as the first. Even though it feels like the same story, it's actually not the
Hmm.
same because there's been some healing that has been happening along the way. It's just not done yet.
Hmm.
And so you got to
Right.
tell the story again. And that's a
Right.
part of, but I love that idea that the persevering is allowing, it's persevering in allowing myself to be loved, not
Hmm.
persevering in the sense of like gritting my teeth and bearing the pain for a longer period of time. Because
That's right.
that's what I think I've thought of as like
Hmm.
persevering through suffering is like
Hmm. Hmm.
simply continuing to bear pain as
Hmm.
opposed to in the midst of this vulnerable, humble, sometimes what feels like a humiliating place,
Hmm.
I am going to continue to allow myself to be
Hmm.
loved
Hmm.
and not
Right.
think I have to fix it and not think I have to defend it or pretend that
Hmm.
I'm better than I
Hmm.
am.
Right.
Better by which I mean like feeling better than I am, but I'm just going to allow myself to be loved here. I think that's really beautiful and
Yeah.
yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense that
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
actually lead to hope.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, this is where neuroscience can actually be helpful in shifting people's imaginations. So you want to be a better
Mm.
pianist, and so you are practicing, and you think I'm just practicing the same scales over and over. It's the same scale, and until we say, well, actually, as far as your brain is concerned, even though the keys on the piano that you're playing are the same keys, as far as your brain is concerned, it's not at all the same scale as it was last week, or as it was a
Mm.
month ago, or as it was 6 months ago, or 10 years ago. And you will find virtuoso pianists that are doing the same workout scales
Yeah.
after 15 years of professional work that they were doing when they first started to play. But every time they do, as far as their brain is concerned, it is a different scale because they are strengthening. The neural networks in their mind are
Exactly.
being changed, they're being transformed. And so, even though outside my skin, it looks like I'm doing the same thing, inside, I am not doing the same thing at all, which is why we say to people, when you are truly being seen, soothed, safe, secure, when your story is being truly received, you never tell your story. You never tell the same story twice. You never do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really helpful to me. Um, and there's so much more we could say, but I want to make sure that before we go, the last thing I wanted to ask was for people who are listening to this podcast and maybe they're kind of feeling a little bit of that vulnerability and
Mm,
like, oh gosh, I'm right at the beginning of this. There is suffering that I haven't
mm,
named. There is
mm,
shame that I've tried to cover
mm,
up. Like I'm
mm,
right at the beginning and I,
mm,
don't have a confessional community and
mm,
maybe I don't even have a therapist, maybe I
mm,
don't even have
mhm,
like where do you start in terms of practicing, right? I mean,
mhm.
like what is that first scale? How do
Right.
people begin that process of moving towards hope?
Well, it's a great question, and Amy Julia, I think it's probably one of the most common questions that I'm asked. Like, where can I find
Mm.
this? Where can I go? Where can
Yeah.
I right? Where can I get a confessional community? Where can I get whatever? Which is completely reasonable. To which my response is often, it is not a thing that you find. It is a thing that you work to create, and it is a risky proposition.
Mm,
And I would say, make a list of 3 people that you can think of that you would like to begin to tell your story to, and that you would like to hear from them, their story. Now,
mm,
of course, when people do this, they're like, "Well, yeah, but no, these people won't do this." Like, well, we're not going to know until we try.
right.
And it's possible that we would say, "We tried, and they thought I was crazy, and this person I tried, and they didn't have time, and this and so forth." And then I would say, "Then give me 3 more names." And when those are done, then give me 3 more names. Because I can tell you the world is waiting for you to find them.
Mhm.
The people that you're talking to that say they don't have time or they think you're crazy are people who are afraid to tell their stories.
Yeah.
And it simply means you haven't found the right person or persons yet to begin to do this.
Yep.
We Christians would say that in the first place, God knows all about this. As Paul Borgman says in his beautiful book, Genesis, the Story We Haven't Heard, he makes the observation, who knows how many people God asked to go with him to Canaan before he finally found someone in Abraham who said yes,
Right.
because we don't have any stories about it. We do know that Jesus asked all kinds of people who said no. So we know that God knows that this is not easy to get people to cooperate with him. Like
Mm,
he partners with, like, after the second page of the Bible, there's nothing that God does in the Bible that does not include or require the participation of human beings. And so if we're going to do this, we have to do this with other people. Yes, people are
mm,
afraid. And I want to encourage us to know that, yes, it might feel, there's no question it'll feel hard. There's no question. But our choice is to remain in our shame and our suffering. That's our choice. We like to say, look, uh, you can work hard and stay in prison, or you can work hard and go free. Hard work is not an option.
mhm.
If we're going to work hard in the effort of of forming durable hope, I can tell you that it be risk free? No, but it will be the most glorious work that you ever do in your life.
Mm. Well, I love that. That's a really beautiful place
Mm,
um, to end this conversation because it is something that all of us can do. So thank you so much for all of these words. And I do just really, I'm really grateful for your books and your podcast and the various ways in which you speak and serve other people. I mean, just tirelessly. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for sharing with us today.
Oh my gosh, Amy Julia, my pleasure. I don't deserve my life, and this will be yet one more reason for why that's true. So thank you.
Thanks, as always, for listening to this episode of Love is Stronger Than Fear. You will definitely want to check out the show notes so that you can find Curt's latest book, The Deepest Place, and that will offer an even deeper dive into what we were talking about today. I also want to let you know that Sissy Goff will be here with me next time. We are talking about her book, Worry-Free Parenting, and I'm sure you'll want to hear that too. It's been quite something to read and think about that book. Also, if you go over to amyjuliabecker.com/newsletter, you can join my email list. And that email list does include reminders about these podcast episodes. I would love for you to catch every one. I will also note that on the day this episode drops, it is Halloween and also the final day of Down Syndrome Awareness Month. So if you are looking for more content related to Down syndrome awareness, the past 2 episodes of this podcast were related to Down syndrome and topics related there. You can also find even more writing, information, some essays I've written, some things that our daughter Penny has written about her own life, or on my social media pages or on my website, amyjuliabecker.com. I also love to hear from you. My email is amyjuliabeckerwriter@gmail.com, so please be in touch. And I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Jake Hansen for editing the podcast, to Amber Beery, my social media coordinator, because she makes everything happen. And I really and truly would not be here without her. And finally, as you go into your day today, I'm thankful for you, that you're here, that you're listening. And I hope that you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.